that's such a great question. I think it's the number one thing. Any preparation increases your ability to be successful. It's the most important aspect, and only 20% of people do because they're not looking forward to the negotiation, or they're not, they don't want to think about it. They just want to go. And so preparing emotionally is a part of that preparation. And we know from research that any kind of emotion that we're feeling, whether it's excitement and being happy or fearful or anger, it clouds our ability to think. So understanding that if we're facing a high stakes situation, that means it's a high risk for us. And anytime that happens, you need to prepare. And a part of that preparation is, what emotions am I going to be that are going to come to me? And so that you can say in the moment, all right, it was expected. I see that. I'm feeling really nervous. It doesn't mean it's going to change my plan because I've prepared. But just being able to identify that it's there and anticipating that it'll be there, I think allows you to be able to deal with it in the moment so that you can move through it and not make it hijack you, and so that you don't get what you want.
You said that 20% of people prepare. What are the other 80% doing as they come into a negotiation emotionally?
Yeah, I think they're wanting to get in so they can get out. And so they don't really want to take the time to prepare, or they believe that I've done this, I kind of understand, I know this person, this is not a real negotiation. There's a lot of these things that just put it off. They don't prioritize preparing. And it's research based that when you do prepare, you're ready. And it makes sense because it allows you to have a plan in the moment. It allows you to see things that you wouldn't be able to see because you don't have to process in real time. And so you're actually more successful when you do, but it's a missed opportunity. I have a friend who's an attorney, and she says that's the first thing she looks for. She figures out how prepared the other side of the table is. And as soon as she realizes that they're not as prepared as they should be, she takes advantage of that because she sees it so often.
It's fascinating you say that, because I was called into a mediation a couple of years ago, and I had to present myself. You couldn't bring in a lawyer or a barrister, you had to present yourself. And my mentor always said, Daniel, if you go into a negotiation, you have to be overly prepared. And I love that word, overly prepared, because he said he went into a negotiation and he was going to prepare for 10 hours. He ended up preparing for 16 hours, and he said he was glad he did the extra 6. And I'm very suggestible when it comes to what a mentor will say. So I over-prepared. When I went into the mediation, I arrived with 440 pages of documented evidence.
Wow.
And I had it in my nice Louis Vuitton handbag. Now, the other party, they brought along a lawyer, which they weren't supposed to, and he rocked up with 1 page.
Wow.
And I laughed my head off. I knew nothing about the legal system, but I laughed my head off because I knew I had 440 pages of documents that I could go through one by one. And so that anticipation at the start was there, but then my nerves calmed right down because I realized how good the preparation actually was.
Yes. I love that. And, that's leverage. Even showing that you're prepared, how rattled that could get somebody else. And that inability to think can go to either side of the table. So that's brilliant. That was great. Way to go. But that's a lot of preparation.
Well, I knew I was going to be emotional because I had to represent myself. And how do I detach myself?
Yeah.
I am myself. I've got to represent myself. But I also knew that in the legal system, it doesn't matter about opinion. It doesn't matter about your emotion. It comes down to what you can prove with evidence.
Yeah.
And I remember the other party, they just tried to assassinate my character. And that's all they tried to do, assassinate the character. And when I stood up, I said to the mediator, I'm not here to assassinate anybody's character or to destroy them emotionally. I'm just going to present the facts. I went through page after page after page. And as I did that, the emotions settled right down. And I think I ended up getting a little bit excited. It was like a competition towards the end. I think I'm going to win this.
Nice.
So I know how important it is to be in that 20%. And I think the other 80%, they're at a significant disadvantage. And I really think that fear really gets in their way. But I also believe that fear can help you. From your perspective, how can we work with our fear? You know, how do these fears help us, or how can they help us?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's something that I work with clients on and also deal with myself. And I think the first step is to just be able to understand it and see it when it shows up, because sometimes it's unexpected, and that can really change our skill level, our leverage, as you said. It can change the whole situation to our detriment if we're not ready for it. And so you and I were talking a little bit about how sometimes people say they may be fearful, but they reframe it for themselves as excitement. And that's not a bad strategy, because then any emotion that your body goes through, it has a physical shift. And so you can feel your emotions, right? It's not just in here. So just being able to say, all right now I need to think up here. So I'm going to that's one thing I do. I think about keeping my emotion in my body. I can't get rid of it, but when I have a plan I've prepared, I can allow myself to stay with the plan that my past self created for us. So that if I get a little bit triggered or tripped up by my emotions that come in, I can kind of refer back to the plan until I can get my bearings again. Because you mentioned like the power shift, that's really real. And we can create this perceived power against ourselves when we believe we're not as good of a negotiator as the other side. There's research that backs that too, that says that the person that believes that they're a better negotiator, and you just illustrated that very well, is more, they show that power in the room. So to answer your initial question, I would say, understanding our emotion, understanding that we are emotional beings, and negotiation can be, the reason it is something that people know is important, but they don't tend to train for, is because negotiation is always different. It always involves different people. The circumstances change. There's a lot of emotion involved. And so it's hard to train for it because it's always going to be different. So you need to find the mindset that's going to allow you to be as objective and agile in the moment so that you can maneuver through to get where you need to go. And so that's how I kind of look at emotion, is you have to be able to prepare for it, understand it, see it, and have a plan for what you're going to do with it.
I remember an earlier court case I was involved in. I went through a whole range of emotions. The first emotion that I experienced was I felt mad. I started to get angry because you've attacked me. You've stated something false, and now I'm mad. And it's like, I want to get revenge. I can't hit you physically, but I want to hit you with all these facts. And I could feel that rise up in me. By the end of the negotiations, I felt glad because I had, in my mind, a perceived win, a perceived resolution. Hey, I'm going to walk away from this. There's a little bit of emotional scarring, a little bit of scarring to the ego, but physically, I'm fine. So I had something to celebrate. I also felt scared because after the first court case, it wasn't closed and everybody could return to get some more information. And I was scared, okay, I've had this perceived win, but what if it's just in my head? What if they dig something up? And maybe, like you said before, it's like that imposter syndrome. What if they go and find something about me, dig something up from the grave and bring it back into the next session? Oh, gosh. and I'm going through all of these emotions, and I noticed that as I was attempting to regulate the emotions, I was distorting what the facts were. I was getting confused between the facts and the feeling. And as Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I love that when he said that. And that's what I went through. But I also understand that, like you said, each negotiation is different. The feelings are going to be different
Yeah.
and the results are going to be different.
Yeah.
Over your career, what's the worst negotiation situation you've been in?
So there's so many to pull from. But I thinking about that, and what comes to mind first for me is I was negotiating a deal with Boeing, and the person that was on the other side of the table
Not
was somebody.
going, I'm not going.
Never knew that. Thank you for sharing that. The person on the other side of the table was somebody I admired, respected, and I knew he was just brilliant. And I worked for a company that I couldn't make all the decisions at the table. And so he would counter me, and then I would have to say, okay, let me find out. And he
Can
got
you
really,
define what a counter is? Because
yeah,
I think a lot of people who aren't up to speed on negotiation, if they're asked to counter, they might not even know what that is.
yeah. So somebody makes an offer to you, and they say, so whoever starts and anchors the negotiation. So it normally is the basic terms of the deal, and it's a lot more complex than that if it's a lot of legal terms and business terms and service level agreements and all those things. But let's just say that you're negotiating a price, a term, and a service level. So it's whoever puts those out on the table first. Those are the important terms for both parties. There might be some nuances, some details that go beyond that. But once those are presented by whoever, there's a strategy around that too. The person that goes next counters and says, okay, I understand you want this service term. Let's work on the fee. The fee needs to be 10% lower or something. So he was countering our offer and saying, instead of 12 months, I don't remember the specific details, but instead of 12 months, I want it to be longer. I want it to be 24 months. And in that consideration, so he's kind of trying to frame it for me in a way that makes sense to me. This will be good for you because you'll get a longer term contract overall. And he had done his math really fast. Overall, you'll get X more amount over time, but the revenue was going to be about the same over a longer period of time. So he was really smart. Talk about prep. He kind of thought about the manipulation of the numbers and how to present them to me. And me not having done that math, he kind of put me on the back of my heels. And so I wasn't as ready. So I said, well, I have to go ask. And he got really, he got mad. He got more frustrated than anything. And he said, Susie, I respect you. I really enjoy working with you, but it's really frustrating to negotiate with you because you're not the negotiator. And that was such an interesting moment for me because I that really helped me understand the power in the room. It's something that I really look back on now, and I find out that's one thing you need to find out before you go into any negotiation is, are they the decision maker? Can they make the decision on the terms? Because you're not sitting in front of somebody, you're negotiating with yourself because they're going to come back with another round. And that's a fair question to ask. So now that's a question that I ask. But that was hard. That was a hard lesson because it was like, he was essentially telling me you're not enough. So to your point, my ego got in the way.
That takes me back to 1999, and I started my career in real estate. And my mentor said to me, Daniel, you've got to be a really good negotiator. It's one thing to be able to get your fee, but another thing to be able to get a really good fee. He said, our fee's 3.6%, where everybody else is around about 2%. So you're going to have to show that you can negotiate. And if you can't show that you can't negotiate your fee, the homeowner will assume that you won't be able to negotiate the best sale price for the home. And so we had to do a lot of preparation for our negotiation. Mm-hmm. So that was the start of it. But when it came to contracts, there was a lot of language in there that a typical real estate agent wouldn't understand about the contract.
Yeah.
And at the back of the contract, there was a page where there was special conditions. And what we were taught to do was to remove all the inclusions from the property. So basically, when you went to a property, you could view it, but when you looked at the contract, the grass wasn't included, the rose garden wasn't
Wow.
included, the light bulbs weren't included,
Wow.
the gas top stove wasn't included, the air conditionings weren't included, the chandeliers weren't included. So when we showed the property for the listing price, let's say it was 499,000, that was just for the shell, because we
Wow.
knew people would negotiate, but we needed to have some concessions. Okay,
Interesting.
so if you want that, well, then we're going to remove that $25,000 cooker. Are you okay with that? Oh, no, 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 no,
Wow.
no, no, no. Okay. Well, all the light bulbs, the chandeliers are going to come with us. And there was
Oh.
even people who'd paid, $30 and $40,000 for turf in their yards, and they even left that out of the contract. They said, well, if you don't want to pay the asking price, then what we'll happily do is we will take the lawn with us because we spent $30,000 on it. Now,
Wow.
some people went, you know what, I'll just pay the asking price.
Yeah.
And we would always demonstrate this to our customers to show them how we would work with concessions. And so me getting my fee of 3.6% became very easy at the front end because I could demonstrate on the back end how we could get the extra money. But it was a skill that had to be learned. And it wasn't something I was born with. My parents were second-hand dealers. So in the pawnbroking business, you're buying and selling second-hand goods. You're always negotiating on the front end. But the biggest conflict I remember is, although we're wheeling and dealing on the front end, my mum put a big sign up in the shop that said, no haggle, no hassle. So on the front end, we had to negotiate. But on the back end, the rule of the business was we don't negotiate with customers. And
Yeah.
it was such a conflict because I had that mentality and
Yeah.
now I've got to negotiate consistently. And I think other people, especially Australians, we like to see a price tag. And if it's in black and white, we tend to assume that's a fact. And my
Yes.
mentor told me, he said, Daniel, anything that you see in black and white is not a fact. If you go into a negotiation, you've got to imagine that it's written in pencil. And what you can do is you can just take your eraser and you can erase out that number. If it says 499,
Yeah.
you can bring it down to 399. But just because it's in black and white doesn't mean it can't be negotiated,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
was some interesting lessons.
yeah, it's interesting. I think, there's a lot of interesting nuances there because there's the relationship that's involved too, about if you felt like that was in the contract and it wasn't. Like those are things that you have to consider in a negotiation is what is the relationship at the end? But what you were saying was all the value proposition, all the pieces were all these parts of leverage. And so your brainstorming was what are all the pieces that are still in the deal, especially if it is a contract? You better have some longevity as it relates to the deal, because you could talk about the deal points at the beginning, just those three things, but you could be talking for another year about all the details around that. And those deal points might shift. So you have to be careful how you do that. Super interesting, though. That's an interesting way of looking at it. It's all about leverage at the end of the day. What is your leverage? What is your parts of leverage? And that's where you need to brainstorm.
And that's where you got to be in that 20%. You got to be in that
Yep.
20% who starts to think. And thinking puts us on the side of the angels. It works to our advantage. And in those negotiations, I've felt it myself. I remember I was sitting in front of my lawyer, and he's very aggressive and he's very attentive to detail, something that I'm not attentive to. And as he was reading through the contract, my mum looked at me and she said, "Son, are you okay?" And I said, "Why?" She says, "You're white as a ghost." And I know it can be quite stressful going into negotiations. And those emotions take over. You mentioned before these emotional hijacks. And once you have that emotional hijack, you can't think rationally anymore.
Yeah.
And I believe that we've got to be able to call for a timeout.
Yeah.
So from your experience, what conditions need to be in place so we can call a timeout when we get too emotionally involved?
Yeah. Well, we're always going to go back to that best practice and prepare. If you know exactly what you're looking for in a negotiation, which you should absolutely explore, if that floor and that ceiling, if you will, all the things that fall in there, if they won't give it to you, you have to have the plan to walk away. So that's one. One would be, and I tell people it sounds really good. I'm just going to walk out. But when you're in there and you're emotional, it's hard to do that. You almost need to practice. Okay, at this point, I'm literally going to stand up and walk out. But if there are things that get in your way, if people, fear and anger are two things that psychologically trigger people. And some people, and I believe that some negotiators learn these negative tactics that they just do over and over again. I don't know that it's always conscious as a tactic, but they use it. So they've noticed that when they get angry or intense or intimidating, they'll do it. And so I think as we look at what are those boundaries for us, if making you nervous, somebody's making you uncomfortable, if somebody has more knowledge than you, I think it's really fair to say time out. And you mentioned your lawyer is very well schooled. He's really smart. Like you know, there's just a lot of terms he needs to know. Those are the times that we allow ourselves to be intimidated. But I would say, hey, listen, I don't come from your world. So you need to slow down, ask more questions, get your bearing in any way you can. So if you're going to stay there, get as much information as you can before you press time out, and just say, listen, I don't know as much as you do. Can you help me understand what this means? And I think that's really fair. Instead of feeling like I should have known that, because we can get in our own way. We're like, oh my gosh, I should not have to ask this. This is a stupid question. They're going to think I don't know what I'm doing. You know, sometimes we need them to meet us halfway. It's not about, it's a relationship at the end of the day. So giving you some insight into help me understand what those terms mean. Am I signing something that, you know, we're going to move into this as a partnership? So help me understand that. I think those are fair questions. And when you see your emotions go high, it's either leave, ask some questions to kind of put the onus on them so you can see if you can gain your composure, get more information, and then make the game time decision on what you're going to do. And if they do get unruly, and to say, hey, I'm feeling a little tension on your side. Do we need to take a break? Do we need to, we can come back and start right here. So just having that awareness and that giving yourself the license to make those game time calls. If you feel like you're not thinking straight, especially if you get triggered emotionally, you'll hijack yourself if you don't.
I realize timing is a very important factor in negotiation. And when I was at mediation, the arbitrator said, you need to take a timeout. And he sent both parties outside for 10 minutes. And he said, come back in here in 10 minutes with a resolution. Now, I was representing myself. The other party had a solicitor. And so they went to one room, I went to the other room by myself. And I literally stood there for 9 minutes and 30 seconds by myself. And I knew exactly what he was doing. He was using time to his advantage. He walked back in the room, sat down, tried to give me a dressing down, told me all the things that he was going to do and say. And I thought, he's trying to intimidate me.
Yeah.
And he said, Daniel, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to take this offer. And then blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, 10 seconds, hey? And I looked at him and I started to count backwards. 10, 9,
nice.
8, 7, 6, 5. And I kept counting down. As I counted down the numbers of the 10 seconds, the redness started to rise from his neck. It started to go up through his cheeks all the way up. His eyes started to go blood red. And I'd called him out on his bullshit. I'd called his bluff. And I went all the way down to 0 and I said, let's roll the dice. And we went back in to the mediation and he got slammed from the arbitrator. And I could see that heavy-handed tactic, the intimidation, the fear, using legal language and terminology and over the top of me. So I just counted down because I knew I was prepared to roll the dice and I was willing to call his bluff.
Yeah.
And it worked to my advantage. But if I didn't have that confidence in myself, I probably would have allowed him to walk all over me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key right there.
Timeout worked.
Yep, that confidence.
So true.
That's exactly right.
So for somebody coming into a negotiation, could you just give them a couple of quick tips, once again, just to control those emotions and to prepare emotionally for the negotiation?
Yeah, I think do what you can, even if it's a few minutes before you walk into a negotiation, to look at the positive outcomes of the negotiation. If your mindset is around doing what you need to do to get what you need instead of all the risks that you could face, that tends to make you frame that engagement in a positive way. And so it's really that frame of mind, thinking about the emotions that will come up and be able to have a plan for what you're going to do about them, how you're going to maybe ask a question to kind of get yourself to calm down. When I'm intimidated, I used to negotiate against this guy, Bill, who's really intimidating to me. So I would take the first couple minutes to ask about his son, who was a young 2 years old at the time, and he just became a different person before he became that really kind of shrewd negotiator. And that helped me humanize, like you had talked about earlier, kind of level set the power. Because at the end of the day, it's all about power. So when you're experiencing any emotion, you're decreasing your power in the room. So you need to figure out, how do you live with the emotion that you might be having? Look at the bright, like the positive side of the negotiation agreement, and then be able to, in the moment, say, this is the plan that I was going to do, I'm going to do it. Because emotion can trigger us and we don't make good decisions. So you are more likely to end up with a bad negotiation, and that's worse than no negotiation at all.